Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlip. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_data. Well, some of you saw the message. Many of you, I'm sure, did not. But as I said, I was going to take the weekend to kind of work on the NFL draft big board a little bit. Also, once again, had my stupid little machine thing break down on me, which I got a new one yesterday. Was planning on starting yesterday, but it came kind of late, and I just said, screw it. Because I'll be honest, if I have an excuse to give myself a day off, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So, but we're back in action, I think. I think everything seems to be working right now, so we're good to go. $170 later. I will get to my work on the draft board in a little bit. I got to make some tweaks, so I don't want to reveal anything at this time. Just kind of an update on what I'm doing. I've done this. I haven't done it in a couple years, but the way that I like to do it, there's kind of two ways that I do this. Number one is, like everybody else, you watch the tape and you make determinations based on whatever, right? Most people are, they have a process to it. So there'll be a grading system or whatever, something more official based on, their years of experience and what they find to be most important in a prospect translating to the NFL, et cetera, et cetera. I tend to do the more serious work when it comes to my statistics-based rankings, which I'll talk about in a second, and then secondarily, when I watch tape, that tends to be more of a gut thing. I watch it thoroughly. I want to watch at least 3 games, if not more. I watch the all 22. It's not completely arbitrary, but I don't take the time to actually, because it's so, the hard part for me is to actually be able to quantify it. Like, okay, I really like their release off the line, right? I'll put that in my notes, but how much do I like it? Am I going to give them an 8? An 8.2? Like, I don't know, dude. I don't know. So that's honestly the much more fun and satisfying and gratifying way to do it. However, being a big statistics guy that I am, and I really do enjoy doing it, what I like to do, what I've started doing, and this year much more thoroughly, thanks to the help of AI, even though it's slowing me down a little bit because some of this stuff's not working, but it definitely shaves off a bunch of time in terms of if I try to do this manually without the help of AI or Python or whatever, I would not be able to do it because the data sets are too massive. But essentially, the idea is, number one, get a large group of NFL players. In this case, it's from 2015 on. There's a reason for that, but 2015 on. Like every single NFL player, and there's a lot of them. Number two is to assign a value to them, which is one of the harder and most important things to do, but I found a way that kind of makes sense. There's always going to be a problem with assigning value, but I found one that I think is pretty good. From there, you go back and find all these people's college statistics. So I pulled college stats from 2023 all the way back to 14, because 2015 draft year to 2024 draft year would be their final years of college would be 2014 through 2023. Then you find the correlations. How much do these stats tend to matter for this position? So quarterback rating, quarterback PFF passing grade, all these kinds of things. Their rank on big boards, which I always include because it's one of the most important ones. So if they're, ranked number 5 overall, that has an impact, huge impact. Then you take that and you assign it to this year's class. So you take all the quarterbacks, for example, that's what I started with. I don't know why I always start with quarterback. It's the most work because there's so many stats and we don't care about quarterback, but I always just forge ahead with quarterback. You take all those same stats, you lay them out, and you say, okay, now we know how much each of these stats matter in terms of how that translates into value in the NFL. So sort of regressively apply that and see what you come up with. So I do have a quarterback ranking right now. I don't want to bring it out yet because I want to double check and tweak a couple things first. And then what I did after that was started doing defense because I'm using a lot of PFF stats, and defense is all kind of in one. That way I can kind of do bulk as opposed to position by position. I can kind of go much quicker through some of the stuff. So I've started cornerback, and I'll go from there. So I'm hoping this should be, let's say by next week, we should start being able to have some things that actually make sense. And then I do want to do another mock, but we're not going to do that today because we missed a good amount of time. So I want to make sure that we're all caught up on the news. And for the sake of not burying the lead, why don't we just go ahead and start with what everybody's talking about right now, and that's Myles Garrett. Now, Myles Garrett, I'd kind of alluded to this. It's in the opposite direction, but I had kind of made this point already, like when it comes to Max Crosby and whatnot, in terms of like it's definitely happening or it's definitely not. And the point is, things change rapidly. They go from, I want to be traded, to we've got a deal worked out and I'm staying, or from, I definitely want to stay, to I've requested a trade very quickly. The Myles Garrett one, I didn't necessarily expect. I thought that it was probably going to get done. I thought that I thought the tone shift implied that he had gotten the money that he had hoped for. But again, similar to what I had said, don't ever just assume anything's done because things at this time of year change pretty rapidly, and that's what happened with Myles Garrett. And so as impossible as it seems that a guy like Myles Garrett would ever be available, here we are. And it's the same with Max Crosby, right? Max Crosby seems like he wants to go, and then there were some comments, and people are like, oh, see, he's staying. He made these comments, and it's like, well, he's probably staying. That's true. And it actually makes more sense that Myles Garrett is becoming available than it ever would have been Max Crosby. The reason being the contract situation, or the salary cap situation. The Raiders are doing fine as far as their salary cap. They have all the money in the world to throw at Max Crosby. The Browns are in a freaking mess. They've been in a mess ever since the Deshaun Watson situation, obviously, but they have a disaster on their hands. They are in full rebuild mode. Myles Garrett is 29 years old. It does make sense that this one of the two wouldn't end up working out. Not to say Max Crosby couldn't end up hitting the market. That it really just comes down to him saying, I don't freaking want to be here anymore. But the big question is, should the Packers get Myles Garrett? And this is where I, as a, Packer fan, Packer loyalist, Ron Wolf, Ted Thompsonite person, I'm kind of torn because on one hand, you can't give up this amount of value. On the other hand, this is exactly what Ron Wolf did when he got Reggie White. This is exactly what Ted Thompson did when he got Charles Woodson. Charles Woodson, slightly different scenario, but it's kind of that defining free agent move that preceded a change in an organization toward a genuine Super Bowl caliber team. And I think that's what's important because a lot of us look at it as the Packers would never, and that's obviously nonsense. First of all, Brian Gutekunst has demonstrated to be much more willing to be aggressive than people like Ted Thompson, and even Ted Thompson recognized things like this. There is, I think the Packers get mischaracterized as just being cheap for the sake of being cheap, and that's not true. I think it's just a question of what do you find value in? And they tend to find value in picks more so than just sort of arbitrary. All the fans want every single washed up wide receiver out there, and the Packers don't usually dabble in that kind of stuff. This is an entirely different situation, right? The Green Bay Packers find immense value in quarterback, which is why they paid Aaron Rodgers as much as they paid him. That's why they numerous times have paid their quarterbacks the highest in all of football. They will draft quarterbacks when they don't need quarterbacks. They will do things to make sure they have quarterbacks above and beyond what a lot of other teams will do. The question isn't a matter of being cheap. It's a matter of making sure that your team is responsible and trying to maintain a valuable team, which is hard to do long term if you're overly aggressive constantly in free agency and abdicate your duty as a draft and develop team, because it's impossible to be a team through free agency, right? I know Packer Superfan has been on a crusade to say draft and develop is dead. It can't die. It's impossible. There are 53 people on a football team. Most of them make less than $3 million. I mean, almost all of them make less than $3 million a year. Your entire team is filled with draft and develop prospects. However, there are a select few that are your premier players. And this is one of the most, I mean, it's probably overstating it, but if there is a Reggie White, if there is a Reggie White moment over the last, 10 years or so, there essentially have been two that have come to mind. Khalil Mack, number one, who the Chicago Bears got, and let's not forget how elite that defense became, and the fact that the only time that they had a legitimate shot at a Super Bowl, and it was very legitimate, was when they got Khalil Mack. I'm not saying it was entirely Khalil Mack, because it wasn't, but it changed a lot. And then number two is this. Myles Garrett is and has been one of the most elite pass rushers in football for the last 5 to 6 years. He was the second highest graded pass rusher last year, behind only Aiden Hutchinson, who only played a half a year. So if you're not counting him, Garrett's top dog, and that's not uncommon for him. I think he had, I just looked at it yesterday, but 14 sacks, 85 pressures, almost 20% pressure rate, I think. He was, on 400 some odd attempts. He's just a madman. So what I'll say is this. I'm 1,000% positive the Packers are interested in Myles Garrett. The question really comes down to compensation. And as far as, would the Packers forego Garrett because they're hosting the draft, the answer is no. There's just no way. They look, if you just look at the incentive structures, who within Green Bay cares more about the draft than about the Packers getting Myles Garrett? I mean, the only person you could very cynically say would matter would be Mark Murphy, because he, got the draft there and wants it to be a good event or whatever. But to think that Mark Murphy, first of all, would have the ability to tell Gutekunst what to do, number one, which, technically he does, but there's no way, especially being on the way out. Gutekunst has no massive vested interest in the fact that this draft is in Green Bay. What he has a massive vested interest in is making sure this team is as good as it can possibly be, and that would lean way more toward making sure you have Myles Garrett than making sure that you have a first-round pick. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean at any cost. I don't know what the Packers would view as fair compensation and where they'd be willing to go, and I certainly can't promise that they'd be willing to be more desperate than the next team available. Somebody's going to offer the most. Now, we can rule out several teams. Cleveland obviously is not one of the teams, at obvious reasons. He's also said he wants to go to a contender, which I tend to think is true, at least to some degree. He might be able to kind of convince himself that, this team or that team is more of a contender than they actually are if the price is right. There's been a lot of talk about Chicago. Would he consider Chicago as a contender? Would he consider Atlanta as a contender? Even though there's no real historical evidence to point to it, you could use your imagination and say, well, Caleb's going to be amazing, and Ben Johnson's going to be amazing, and if I go in there, everything's going to be great. More than likely, though, you're looking at a handful of teams. These are playoff teams. You want to go to Kansas City. You want to go to Philadelphia. You want to go to Detroit. You want to go to Green Bay. You want to go to Buffalo or Baltimore, although considering it's a trade, I doubt Baltimore's on the table. Probably want to go somewhere with somewhat of a longer window. Not like, a short-term 1-year deal. So the Rams would be a little iffy for me just because I don't know the situation with Stafford and how much longer he's going to be there. Seems somewhat counterintuitive, but that may work against Kansas City as well if they're, probably on the verge of losing Travis Kelce and whatnot. Probably won't matter, but I'm just saying if you're worried about that, it's something to consider. Most of the other playoff teams, I think, are relatively young. I don't know that I would put Minnesota on the list, to be honest. It's hard to assume a team is going to be a Super Bowl contender when you don't even know who their quarterback is going to be, and if they're going to be a good quarterback, presumably J.J. McCarthy is going to be the guy. He might be terrible. So we'll take a break. We'll come back, go through a little bit of information that I have here in terms of the expected value for him, and then we'll see what else we got going on here in the world. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right, so first of all, here is what Myles Garrett had to say. He said, as a kid of the NFL, I focused on the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl, and that goal fuels me today more than ever. My love for the community of Northeast Ohio, blah, 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 blah. Past 8 years have shaped me into the man I am today. While I've loved calling the city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stage won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete and win a Super Bowl. So there you go. That is what he says is the reason. Got no real reason to believe that that's not the case. Although, again, money absolutely talks. So could he twist himself into a pretzel into believing that certain teams are competitors if they're willing to give him more? I don't know, maybe. That all assumes we're talking about a new contract. Maybe they just take on the old contract. I don't really know. That's another whole issue. Now, as for the value, Diana Rossini said that one NFL GM on what a trade for Myles Garrett could look like. Quote, probably a 1+. Can't wait for the it'll be 3 1s crowd. Not happening. 1 and a 2, 1 and 2 3s, throw a player in there, end quote. Another executive told Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports, I'd give up 2 first-round picks and more to land Garrett. So, obviously, a lot of fans are out there thinking 3 firsts and all kinds of crazy stuff or whatever. The conventional wisdom right now is around 2 first-round picks. A first and a second, obviously, is what one GM seems to think, maybe with a player sweetener, first and 2/3, whatever the case may be. It's probably not going to be a very clean trade. Like, here's 2 firsts, here's Myles Garrett. It's probably going to be, here's a first, plus a second, plus a player. We'll get Myles Garrett plus a conditional 5th. You know what I mean? Like, it's just this sloppy mess where we're all sitting here going, okay, so what the heck is the compensation now? So if we're talking Packers, you could be something along the lines of 2025 first and second and third, sort of a first and a second plus a, hey, sorry, our picks suck, compensation pick third, I've seen some people consider Lucas Van Ness. I don't know. Just seems a little bit weird because, first of all, it just seems like the Packers don't generally do that kind of stuff. Second of all, it's, again, like a lot of times when we talk about these player swaps, there's a problem. If it's not good for us, why would it be good for them? You want to get rid of Lucas Van Ness. Why? Because he's not good. Then why would the Browns want him? Now, you could say, well, they want to keep their guy. They can't. So we'll give him somebody with some upside, some potential. He's a first-round pick. Plus, he's cheap, and they can actually afford him. So, okay, we'll play with that. Something about along the lines of, how about a 2025 first, a 2026 conditional second that becomes a first if Garrett earns some kind of honor like Pro Bowl, All-Pro, whatever, and Van Ness. Obviously, we could just do 2025 first, 2026 first, maybe even with a little sweetener because supposedly next year's first is not worth as much. Plus, these are late firsts, 2026 third-round pick on top of it. There's other options, players. Don't know if Eric Stokes is worth anything. That's kind of similar to Lucas Van Ness, but that's an option. Romeo Doubs makes probably the most sense because he's actually demonstrated some value, and the Packers are not really getting rid of him just because he's terrible. It's kind of we've already got a pile of guys around that same talent level, number one. Number two, we're absolutely going to be looking to invest more in the position. Number three, there's some locker room issues. Now, there's also a lot of talk about Jair Alexander. The problem with Jair Alexander is the cost. Even if we look at it and say the guy's got a ton more talent, he's worth a lot more. That's true, but I don't think the Browns could afford him. I mean, maybe, they intended to extend Myles Garrett, so they'd find a way one way or another to do it. But it would not be an easy thing. I think the one of the main benefits of this actually happening is that it just puts more options out there. It's one team that is, let's just assume the Packers don't get Myles Garrett. It's a team that potentially could have gotten a guy like, for example, Khalil Mack, that instead gets Myles Garrett, that pushes the Packers a little bit closer to getting somebody like Khalil Mack or whoever else the Packers might be interested in. It's not even just at the position either, because if somebody, you could even say that for Davante Adams. Let's say, I don't want to say the Lions because that would just be terrible, but let's say the Falcons are looking for, they wouldn't be, but a wide receiver and an edge rusher, and they take a huge swing at edge rusher. Well, that means they're probably not going to be able to take a huge swing at wide receiver either. So just more people becoming available is probably going to end up helping us in the long run one way or another, whether that's directly Myles Garrett or indirectly through taking some competition off the board because they just threw everything they had, all their draft capital, all their money at acquiring Myles Garrett. And no, I don't think that, this puts the Browns on the map, so that cancels it out because, again, I don't think they have a lot right now. They really don't. They need their draft picks because they don't have any money. So you need to start purging your expensive players, and you need to start acquiring draft picks and kind of rebuilding the old-fashioned way, The biggest negative here is that, there are teams like Chicago and like Detroit and like Minnesota that are being talked about for various reasons, whether it's just because Minnesota likes to dabble in free agency, Chicago loves to dabble in free agency, and some people think they're a contender, or Detroit because they're obviously a contender. And you pair him with Aiden Hutchinson, and you have the two best pass rushers in football on your defense, and you suddenly become this unstoppable force. That is the biggest negative here, is that as much as we're hoping that it's us that wins the sweepstakes, some of us, maybe some people don't want them, I don't know. As much as we're hoping it's us that gets the sweepstakes, at the same time, it's very obviously mathematically more likely that he goes somewhere to a team that we don't like. I mean, even if there's only one other team on planet Earth that we don't like, let's say it's Detroit, let's just call it 50-50. Add in Chicago, Minnesota, San Francisco, Philly, Kansas City, whatever teams you do. I mean, it becomes more likely. And that brings me to my final point. He's very likely going somewhere that isn't Green Bay. He's also going somewhere that isn't every single team except one team. We have to stop pretending that the most improbable outcome is the only acceptable outcome, that us winning the sweepstakes is the only acceptable outcome. So what's probably going to happen is he's going to go somewhere else. It's going to be for less than everybody thought. And by everybody, I mean people that just said it's going to be 700 first-round picks in order to get him. They're going to view that as an underpay. And how could Gutekunst be so stupid as to not do it? The fact of the matter is the price is going to be lower than you think, probably, depending on what you think. That is the price. Somebody is going to win the sweepstakes of paying that price and getting him, and it's unlikely going to be us. So I don't want to hear any frickin' whining when the time comes. I can't believe we wouldn't pay da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay. All right. Well, I've already made my stance clear. All right? All right. By the way, the final thing. It is likely that he's going to end up getting an extension when he goes to a new team. That price is probably going to be in and around Nick Bosa's average salary. So you're probably talking mid-30s, 32, 3, 4, $5 million a year. So, 104 year, 140 is not impossible. Something else to keep in mind. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Mason Crosby did officially retire from the NFL after 17 years. Probably kind of saw that coming. Obviously left Green Bay, took a year, moved down south, I believe, and took a year to kind of see how things were going. And then I'm guessing this offseason kind of got the impression, could have gone any which way, but probably got the impression there wasn't a ton of interest and said, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and hang it up. That or, the little bit of interest he got, he saw the numbers and talked with his family and said, I don't know, I kind of like that year off. Also in the news, we got Cooper Kupp is seeking a trade. So that's another, similar to the Myles Garrett thing. Whether you want Cooper Kupp or not, adding more people to the pool, I think, is going to be ultimately a net benefit, assuming he ends up getting picked up, which I would assume he would, even if it's not your favorite candidate, if he still wants to play. I would assume he's got enough in the tank to at least get a contract somewhere. I mean, if Marquez Valdez-Scantling can keep getting contracts, I don't know why that was the first guy I felt like picking on, but it just came to my mind. If you're wondering about Cooper Kupp, by the way, I think his wide receiver one days are behind him. Essentially, he had kind of a 1 to 2 year breakout thing, really more of a 1 year breakout thing. He was good for 4 years, 78, 77, 74, 82 were his first 4 years in LA, then 93. The guy had 178 receptions for 2,425 yards and 22 touchdowns. Just stupid. He hasn't had 1,000 yards since. Still had an 86 grade, 88 receiving the next year, but 812 yards and 6 touchdowns. Then it was 764 and 5. This past year, 806. In the last 2 years, he's had grades in the low 70s. So still a fine receiver, but at 31 going on 32 years old, the fact that he's regressed the last 2 years, and the fact that if you look at it, and there may be injuries tied to this. In fact, he was injured, which is not to his benefit, obviously. But the bottom line is the second half of the year was significantly worse than the first half. And even if you say that was because of an injury, yeah, but that's what happens when you're a 32-year-old slot receiver. You know what I mean? Which is the other negative. He's a slot receiver. We don't really need that, even if you don't like Jayden. I don't think they're going to replace Jayden, especially with a 32-year-old Cooper Kupp. So if you're wondering my thought on bringing him here, that would be my thought, and the thought is no thank you. Anthony Perkins, Packers defensive quality control, so kind of a little bit further down the pecking order, but he got hired away to Jacksonville and will be their secondary coach. So pretty big jump. I mean, it's not like he went to cornerback coach. He went straight to secondary coach. So kind of unfortunate. You have to assume that this was a sort of young up-and-comer. Might be a little bit too early for him, but we're getting poached by Campanile, who obviously was here and is well aware of Perkins. We weren't, so we don't have to be too upset about it. But for a guy to go from quality control to secondary coach, probably pretty talented guy. In other Packers coaching news, Adam Stenavich actually did get a interview with the Houston Texans. Might seem kind of odd because it wasn't a head coaching job. It was offensive coordinator, which he already is. But the point is, there is a possibility of him getting hired away simply because, similar to Matt LaFleur when he was in LA and then went to Tennessee with a sort of lateral move, the point is he went from being a offensive coordinator under a offensive head coach to an offensive coordinator with a defensive head coach, and that's what the Texans have. So Stanovich's next step, if not straight to head coach, which it probably isn't because any offensive success is probably going to go to Matt LaFleur. Plus, there just has not been a great coaching tree coming out of Green Bay's offense. It's been a resounding failure for everybody that's gotten promoted away from our offense. So more than likely, he's going to want to get an opportunity to go somewhere where he's going to be a play caller. If he can have success there, that's when you can start talking head coaching opportunities. But he did get interviewed for the Houston Texans, and it does not look like he's going to be getting that job. So maybe next year. All right, let's take our final break. We'll come back and wrap up the last of these along with a little bit of NFL draft. As I said, I want to make sure we do at least a little bit of that every single day. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back. Ken Ingalls put together a pretty interesting thing here. It's the Green Bay Packers trade target scorecard. I thought this was kind of cool because it has a couple different things that matter for how likely they are to get, let's say, interest from the Packers or whatever. Age, contract years, 2025 cap in trade, 2025 cash in trade, team cap, as in the opposing team's cap, which, if their cap situation is bad, it's better for you. Team cap saved, team want trade, so does the team want to trade them, and trade compensation cost. First of all, this is the first place that I kind of saw where Myles Garrett was much more likely to be traded because although Max Crosby is a little bit younger and whatnot, and they would save more money by keeping him. The fact of the matter is the 2025 cap in a trade for Myles Garrett is significantly lower than Max Crosby. Max Crosby would be $23 million. It's only $5 million for Myles Garrett. Now, again, probably going to be a restructure anyway, and in fact, probably on both of them, but still. The other one is team cap. And team cap is going to be very important because when you look at Max Crosby, it says very good. This is, I'm assuming, Ken Ingles' analysis of each of these teams' cap situation. You know, it's not impossible for any of these guys, and we'll go through the players, any of these guys to hit the market. And there are different reasons why a player could hit the market. One of them is just the player marching into the office saying, I don't want to be here, I want to be traded, which could happen with Max Crosby. The fact of the matter is, though, and actually we should probably, since we're talking about it, bring this up. This is a tweet on February 1st from Max Crosby that says, I will be a champion. Again, very small thing, but given the backdrop of Myles Garrett saying, I want to leave because I want to go win somewhere, it's not impossible. Max Crosby says, you know what I want is a Super Bowl. I'm not going to get that here, and I want to leave. However, the Browns don't really have the flexibility to say, I'm going to give you everything to keep you here. The Raiders do have a much easier opportunity to do that. They don't have a bunch of expensive guys. They didn't trade for this terrible quarterback and then give him the worst contract in the history of the world that nobody in the world could ever afford. So they could back up a Brinks truck to Max Crosby and try to catch him on the right day and be like, bro, just sign it. Just sign it. Look at the truck. Look at the money. Just please write your name right here. We're good to go. Couple other people, now that we know Myles Garrett is already available, and there are some positives, contract years, cap and trade, cash and trade, and team cap all work in our favor. The cap and cash are relatively low. He's got 2 years left on his deal, and the team cap is very bad. Trey Hendrickson is another one, edge rusher. He's 31 years old, which is not good. He's got 1 year left on his deal, which is not necessarily good, although, again, a lot of these guys are getting new contracts anyways. 2025 cap in a trade, it would cost $16 million against the cap. That's kind of middle of the road, but it's certainly lower than what you'd pay a premier guy. The cash in a trade, which, you know, cash and cap are two different things. There's actual financial money you'd have to pay, and then there's what the cap hit would be. Also $16 million, so it's the same. The team cap is good, not very good, but good, so they could pay him if they feel like they're in a position to succeed. And of course, when you have Joe Burrow, I can't imagine you're saying, let's rebuild. So that's tough. The team, as in the Bengals, would save $16 million. That also works in our favor. However, low chance that they would want to trade them, which is what is highlighted here. By the way, Myles Garrett also low, but it didn't matter because Garrett said, I don't care, I'm leaving. And then the trade compensation cost, how much would it cost to get him, would be high, which is also a negative. Some of the other guys, Jeffrey Simmons, probably the next least likely, I guess you could say, although it's close. Low likelihood they'd want to trade him, high trade compensation, and the salary cap is good. Those are the things that kind of work against you. However, he's 28. He would only cost about $18 million against the cap and cash. The Titans would save over $8 million, and he's got 3 years left on his deal. So all of that is rather appealing. Then you got Garrett Wilson. Similar, but maybe slightly more in our favor. Again, low likelihood they'd want to trade him. I think it would be a terrible decision. I think what they need to do is get rid of the old guys like Davante and Rodgers and focus on the younger guys like Garrett, but we'll continue. He's only 25. He's only got 1 year left on his deal, but it's a $3.5 million cap hit because he's on his rookie deal. The team cap is okay, not great. They would save $3.5 million. And the trade compensation, it says medium, although that would be surprising if it wasn't a high cost to get Garrett Wilson. Maybe it's just the positional value. I don't really know. But his estimation anyways is that it's pretty middle of the road. I would absolutely pull the trigger if he became available. That to me is very similar to the two guys we got last year. Really young guy that has no business hitting the trade market. Really just an incompetent team doing a stupid thing, letting somebody hit the market, and we have to go capitalize. That brings us to the next two guys, one of which you're already well aware of. That's Davante Adams. The negatives, 33 years old, 25 cap hit would be $36 million, as would the cash. Those are the negatives. you would have to assume there would have to be some kind of a new contract worked out because nobody's paying Davante $36 million. On the in our favor side, the likelihood the team would want to trade him, obviously very high. The Jets do not want Davante Adams anymore. Number two, the trade compensation cost would be relatively low. Why? Well, one, because everybody in the world knows they don't want Davante Adams anymore. Number two, the team is going to save $32 million to move on from Davante Adams. That's why. Finally, and this is one that hasn't been talked about, at least not by me, maybe some other people are talking about it a ton, that actually does make kind of a lot of sense, and this is kind of what Ken, when he posted this, is kind of the whole thing he had said, is I made some updates to my Packers trade target scorecard. He says, DK Metcalf still remains the most realistic name I hear being discussed who could land in Green Bay. And he lays out a good case for it right here. Number one, he's 28 years old. It's not super young, but that's plenty young. Number two, he would cost $18 million against the cap on his final year, which isn't a good thing, but it's his final year, which would mean he would need an extension, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It does mean the cost goes up, but it also means we get to be in full control of his contract. We can structure it exactly how we want, as though he had been here the whole time, and we're just giving him his extension. The team cap situation for the Seahawks, very bad, similar to the Browns. I was not aware of that. Very glad to hear that. It essentially means they need to do some stuff. Now, on top of that, it's worth noting there's been a lot of talk, probably because of the contract situation, but there's been a lot of talk about Seattle possibly moving on from their quarterback. Now, if they're possibly even thinking about that, then you're talking rebuild. 28 is still relatively young, but if your salary cap is a disaster and you're going to do a full teardown and rebuild, it's not impossible that Metcalf is a name that could be moved on from. Also, so he put sort of middle of the road, mediocre, that they would want to trade him. The trade compensation cost would be middle of the road, which is probably fair. It wouldn't be like Myles Garrett high, right? But then the other thing is team cap saved. How much would the Seahawks save? It would be $11 million off their books if they moved on from DK Metcalf. So again, the other thing that just gets me excited about this is just seeing these players, because these are really good football players. There are off seasons where there's just not a lot of good guys available, whether it's free agency or trade or whatever. Myles Garrett is absolutely a freak. He's already going to hit the market. Max Crosby, less than 50%, but maybe. Trey Hendrickson is a good football player. DK Metcalf is a very good wide receiver. Davante Adams is still a good receiver. Garrett Wilson is a very good receiver. His first year was kind of his biggest year. And maybe this is the reason why his value would have dropped, because he just hasn't really done much since that first year. But his first year, he was fantastic. Year two, you got to look at the quarterback situation. And then after that, you got Aaron Rodgers coming in and kind of buried Garrett Wilson a little bit, with his wanting to go to other receivers and bringing in all his own guys and everything. It just didn't work very well for Garrett Wilson. I think he would work much better in a Matt LaFleur system where it's less about, hey, you need to learn all Rodgers' hand signals and understand what he wants you to do and this, and that, and the other. And it's a little bit more of a simplistic, hey, just let me handle it. You run the route that I tell you to run on this particular play, and you'll be open, and then we'll have our guy throw it to you. Right? It's a much more simplified kind of offense, I think, for everybody. Jeffrey Simmons, absolute beast on the interior. I would honestly be happy with any single one of these guys. Now, obviously the compensation and all that matters. Davante may be the least appealing, but at the same time, one of the most appealing just because it's freaking Davante Adams. But again, if these people do hit the trade market, it's going to flood the market. Supply and demand, what does that do? Even if it's a different position, it just makes it more likely that the Packers, who I think are going to be aggressive, are going to get some studs. And I really think this could be a fun offseason. I really do. I think the Packers might be aggressive. It might not be Myles Garrett. But the other way to think about this is if they don't put all their eggs in one basket for Myles Garrett, they may get multiple people. How awesome would it be if they got sort of a Jeffrey Simmons type of player, even if it's not specifically him, but like a Jeffrey Simmons and a DK Metcalf instead of Davante and Myles Garrett or something. Again, those are trades, but I'm just saying in general. So pretty cool little chart that he put together. He may have even updated this. I don't think so. No, he did. Let's see what else we got. I see he added Cooper Kupp. I don't know if he added it. He did. All right, so we got Cooper Kupp added to this. Again, I'm very much out. 32 years old, 2 years left on his deal, would cost $20 million against the cap, and the Rams are in a good situation, but you can pretty much scratch that because he's already requested a trade and will be traded, so that's kind of irrelevant. The team will save $12.5 million. Trade compensation will be low for obvious reasons. The other guy he added is Bradley Chubb. And Bradley Chubb doesn't have any negatives. He's the only guy with no negatives. 29 years old, would cost less than $20 million, $19.5 million. They would save money, not much, but $1.2 million. The desire to trade, mediocre. Trade compensation would be mediocre. And 3 years left on his deal. And the Dolphins are very, very bad salary cap situation. Let me look at Bradley Chubb because I haven't even thought about him in years. Yeah, very weird situation with Bradley Chubb. Not the most desirable, but here's the situation. So he went to Denver. I remember this whole draft thing because he was going to be a late first-round pick, and I remember watching him and just thinking, this guy's way too talented. He ended up going 5th overall, which ended up probably being too early because he wasn't very good in Denver. Spent 4.5 years in Denver. Had a lot of injury issues. So his rookie year, he had a 67 grade overall. We won't go through all the nuance, but he did have 57 pressures and 13 sacks. The next year, in 2019, he got hurt. 2020, he plays 700 snaps, so for all intents and purposes, he's likely healthy most of the year, if not all the year. Has a 71 grade, 57 pressures, and 8 sacks. 2021, he's hurt again. 2022, he plays 8 weeks in Denver, has a 75 grade, then gets traded to Miami, and significantly worse when he went to Miami. But then he goes back and plays year 2, which is 2023 in Miami, and has his best year ever. Has an 89 PFF grade, 71 run defense, 85 pass rush, 70 pressures, 13 sacks, 475 attempts. So, couple things. Number one, he's been hurt just about every other year. Number two, you may have noticed I didn't mention 2024. The reason being, he tore his ACL in December of 2023, and so he ended up missing the entire 2024 season. So in total, in high school, he had an ACL tear. 2017, left pinky dislocation. September of 2019, left ACL tear. 2020, grade 2 ankle sprain. Missed the final 2 games of the season. 2021, grade 2 ankle sprain. He aggravated his ankle in week 2, leading to an 8-game absence. Later in 2021, shoulder injury, a grade 1 shoulder injury. 2022, hand-finger fracture. 2023, right ACL tear. He's had 3 ACL tears. Both ACLs and both knees have been torn. I don't know which one it was in high school, but I know it's been a left and a right. So, that's a tough sell, man. If the Packers are just looking at like a 1-year all-in push and you hope he can be healthy, but this is rough. I mean, when he plays, the numbers are good, right? His healthy years, 57 pressures, 456 attempts, 13 sacks. That's great. 57 pressures, 8 sacks, 421 attempts. That's perfectly fine. Not as many sacks as you'd hope, but perfectly adequate. 54 pressures on 471 attempts, 10 sacks. That's fine. 70 on 475 and 13 sacks. That's great. So he's been a good pass rusher his entire career, especially when he's healthy. The problem is the guy can't stay healthy. And he's about to be on his 3rd team already at the age of 28, going on 29. The final issue is that, as far as I know, he's only ever been an outside linebacker. I'm going through his years now. I don't know if Denver made a change at any one point in time, but it looks like all through his time at Denver, as well as his time in Miami, he was a outside linebacker. Now, it's possible that he could be one of those guys that can do both. It's possible that he might even be better. But putting all that together, I can't imagine this is something the Packers would be massively interested in. But again, as long as somebody is interested and as long as somebody is willing to fill a need with Bradley Chubb, which of course somebody will, that's going to help kind of, push somebody a little bit closer to us. In other news, the Steelers are expected to cut edge rusher Preston Smith via Tony Pauline. So just wanted to bring that up because it really wasn't that long ago that, we were talking about what a terrible decision it was to move on from Preston Smith, et cetera, et cetera. As we saw, he was terrible when he was here. We got better when he left. And after 1 year of almost no production, Preston Smith's being cut by the Steelers. So any compensation for Preston Smith was probably too much compensation. In NFL officiating news, the NFL will consider measuring first downs electronically in 2025 regular season. This is according to a Saturday evening report from Mark Maskey of the Washington Post. Quote, the system, which the NFL has tested in game conditions in recent seasons, would involve the football being spotted manually by the on-field officials before the electronic system would determine whether that spot resulted in a first down. So to be clear, this is not exactly what everybody's been asking for. Again, what have I said 1,000 times? They're going to change these things. It's going to take way longer than it should. So what everybody wants is just let technology determine where the ball is. Let technology determine the spot of the ball. That's not really what they're talking about here. What they're talking about is the ref is going to spot the ball, and then that will determine, rather than the chain game coming down and being like, roughly about here and all that stuff and whatnot, they won't need to bring out the sticks and determine all that stuff. It's probably more of a speed of the game kind of thing. The ref will spot it, boom, that'll determine immediately first down or not. So it's a step in the right direction, in my opinion. It removes one thing. I don't know that it removes a ton of controversy, because very rarely do we get upset about the chain gang, right? Usually we get upset about the initial spot to begin with, but whatever. If they end up doing it, it'll give them an opportunity to kind of move in this direction. I think our role as fans is just to be clapping seals every time they do stuff like this. If we whine about it, they're just going to make it all go away. We need to tell them how amazing, like little children showing you their finger paintings. Like, oh my goodness, it's the best thing in the world. Thank you so much. You're so wonderful. And hopefully they'll just keep innovating that way. And then in other NFL refereeing news, statement from NFL Referee Association Executive Director Scott Green, who says, quote, it is insulting and preposterous to hear conspiracy theories that somehow 17 officiating crews consisting of 138 officials are colluding to assist one team. Now, again, I agree with that. I agree with it insofar as what we're talking about is actual collusion, as in pre-game, premeditated, predetermined, hey guys, let's go out there and let's steal it. Now, there's a couple problems. Number one, it doesn't require 138 officials. It could be a couple officials, right? For example, the Buffalo Bills game where you had one guy saying it was a first down, the other guy coming in saying, no, he's about a yard short. That would be one person who is, quote unquote, on the take or whatever the case may be. Right now, again, I don't believe that. But first of all, the idea that the insinuation is that it's a massive conspiracy theory in which every single one of the 138 officials are colluding is not even really necessarily what most people are saying. Now, my opinion on this is that it doesn't have to be anything even conscious. It could be very well something subconscious, which is why I would like to remove a lot of things as far as the human error. Again, it's just one thing that I've proposed that maybe is preposterous, but I don't think that it is, because we've heard multiple crews that tend to benefit home teams. I've never heard of anyone benefiting away teams. It's always the home teams. Why would that be? That's such an odd thing. Maybe it's because they're human beings and they're a little anxious about making a call in which they're booed, and maybe they kind of like it a little bit when you make a call in which everybody cheers. At least it's a little bit easier to do so. Because here's the thing, I think officials are pretty much on every single play, their hand is twitching toward that flag, because there's always kind of was that? It doesn't take much by way of little thoughts in the back of your head about, whether you want to be booed or not, to help you make that determination whether you actually reflexively grab that flag and throw it. How much where you look at it and go, I don't know. I think I kind of saw something there, but I'm not really sure. It doesn't even take it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. It could be once in a while. It could be a couple times that make the difference. And so the point is, again, if you remove from the on-field people and move it to New York, people in New York don't really care about the people on the stands booing, or at least you're going to care a lot less because you're not standing in the middle of the field with tens of thousands of people directly booing at you. and probably screaming at you from the sidelines the entire time. And also, you got the players and everybody else screaming at you too. If you're up in New York, nobody's yelling at you. As far as you and your buddies and your supervisor over there are concerned, you're all doing a swell job. In fact, there shouldn't even be any audio being pumped in. So you can't even hear the stands. You can't hear the live game. It's all just camera. It's like all 22. There's no sound. So again, do I think it's a massive conspiracy theory? No. Do I think that there's a lot of issues with officiating? And I think the evidence is strong enough to assume that for some reason or another, whether intentional or subconscious, superstars tend to get benefited more often than not. Home teams get benefited more than away teams. Superstar quarterbacks get benefited more than lower quarterbacks, or let's say a running back. These things are happening, and we need to remove the human error from it a little bit. All right, moving on to the NFL draft a little bit here. I'll be honest, I don't know who this is. Jerry Wolfel, editor at WolfelPressBox.com, Pro Basketball Writers Association award winner, WNA award winner, PBA award winner, Lindy's Pro Basketball Magazine. Sounds reputable. I don't know. Got 9,300 followers, so he's not just some random person making stuff up, at least I assume. Here is what he had to say. The Packers are expected to draft at least 2 receivers and have shown more than a passing interest in Jalen Noel and Jayden Higgins, both from Iowa State. Higgins and Noel are explosive deep threats and both figure to go in the first 2 rounds. The Packers conducted formal interviews with Higgins and Noel at the ongoing Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. As of right now, again, there seems to be a lot of disagreeing opinions on where these guys are going to go. Jayden Higgins is seen as the number 79 overall consensus. Jalen Noel, 125. I will say, these guys definitely have a reputation for bigger, stronger receivers. And when you look at Jayden Higgins, nothing has really changed. 6'4", 215 pounds, spent 2 years at Eastern Kentucky, had a 60 and then 78 grade. That went up to an 85 at Iowa State and then a 90. So 4 straight years of growth. And even in his 4th year, actually, I'm looking at the wrong year. Never mind. Very consistent 2024 season as far as his grades are concerned. 1,100 yards, 13.6 yards per reception, and 9 touchdowns. Very consistent, very solid, very large receiver. Definitely feels like a Green Bay Packers receiver potentially. Now, he's also similar to a lot of these guys, these Iowa State guys, because he's not really a burner. He's kind of in the 4.55, 4.57 range. NFL Draft Buzz has him 4.55, Roster Watch 4.57. These are not these are projections, not laser time or anything. And obviously, if he goes to the NFL Combine and runs a 4.41 or something, that's going to be a big deal. But he's a very big dude, and I can understand the Packers' excitement. Now, the other guy, Jalen Noel, is not your prototypical 6'4" monster. He is listed via PFF at 5'11", 200 pounds, very similar in terms of getting better every single year. 4 years at Iowa State, 59, 63, 75, and this year 81. He had 80 receptions for 1,200 yards, 15 yards per reception, and 8 touchdowns, very similar, and also relatively consistent as far as having good grades every week. Not as much so as Jayden Higgins, but pretty consistent and really no bad days. 56.5 against Cincinnati was his worst day. He is primarily a slot receiver, which again, I do think is going to work against him, but as far as the Packers selecting him, but it's worth looking at. I'm not going to completely discount anybody. He also is not necessarily seen as a elite burner. He's more in the 4.4 range, sub 4.5, sub 4.45. Senior Bowl, he was tracked there at 20 miles per hour, which is not elite speed, but it's fast if you can crack 20 miles per hour, which is a lot of the time where this 4.45 or sub 4.45 is coming from, the fact that he was kind of able to crack that. So a little bit faster, quite a bit smaller, primarily a slot guy. So if I had to guess, if they were genuinely interested in one of the two, I would say it's probably Jayden Higgins. He is the higher up consensus wide receiver. He has the better grades. He is much bigger and much more physical. However, again, he's not the perfect package if he truly runs a 4.45 or 5.5 or something. Not that that's disqualifying. There's a lot of good receivers that don't have blazing speed. I'm just saying. To say that he's kind of a lock first-round pick is probably a stretch. And then finally, I thought this was kind of interesting. Raekwon Smith, Virginia State running back, had a meeting with the Green Bay Packers. The reason why I find that to be a little bit more interesting than others is because Raekwon Smith is seemingly a diehard Packers fan. He posted on Twitter, "Just imagine," with the praying hands and two hearts, and it's him with number one saying, "Visit." Packers met with Virginia State running back Raekwon Smith. After that is another one of him with a visit, and then it's him as a little kid with his Packers jersey on, with his Packers teammates and everything else, and then another one with him playing his flag football with his Packers jersey on. So it's always fun when you get some diehard Packer fans that can come in here. We had that with, the heck was his name? It's going to drive me nuts. The very similar pictures. He was a safety/linebacker hybrid. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. But anyways, I'm going to leave you guys with that. Like I said, tomorrow we might do a little mock draft or something. We'll see how she goes. But you guys have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk to you tonight, tomorrow, whatever. Have a good one. Bye-bye.